What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another UFC breakdown and predictions video, this time for episode 5 of Dana White's Contender series. Now, last week, episode 4 was awful for us in terms of predictions. We ended up going 2 and 3, so it was our worst episode, and it was a big change from episode 3 where we swept the card and went 5 and 0. Now, last week was a little more difficult to make an educated prediction because there was a lack of film for a lot of the fighters during episode 4. But this week should be a little bit easier because there was only one fighter that I wasn't really able to find much tape on, which we will discuss once we get to that matchup. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you guys are making picks for this card is this card has been absolutely nuts in terms of withdrawing, cancellations, all this other stuff. There was a fighter named Rafael Cerqueira who was supposed to be on this episode, but ended up getting signed to the UFC to take on Ibo Aslan at UFC 308. He was supposed to fight Sadabaldiev, who ended up getting injured. He was then supposed to fight Patrick Grabowski, who withdrew from the fight. And then he was scheduled to fight Francesco Mazzeo. And then Cerqueira ended up getting signed to the UFC. Mazzeo got a new opponent, but then Mazzeo had visa issues, so his new opponent ended up getting another opponent. So it's just absolutely crazy. One of the other guys is returning from last season, and he got a new opponent as well. So it's been absolutely crazy. Thankfully, we get a full 5 fights for episode 5. And we're going to end up breaking down all of the picks. So make sure you guys hit that like button. Drop a comment down below on your thoughts on episode 5 and your picks for this card. And subscribe to the channel if you are new. Starting things off, we have a women's flyweight bout. Corinne Laframboise taking on Nicole Caliari. Now, I broke down, when I was watching tape, I started off with Laframboise, and there's a lot to like about her. And then I went over to the Caliari side, and surprisingly, I thought I was going to pick Laframboise, but I think I am going to go with Caliari. She is the slight underdog in this match, and we're starting things off with an underdog. Laframboise, she has fantastic jiu-jitsu with great transitions. Once she gets the fight to the ground, she gets her opponents thinking of the ground and pound, and then will sneak in some submissions. Her best takedowns usually come from trips from in the clinch and on the feet. She gives her opponents a lot of different looks that include leg kicks, but she'll ultimately wants to eventually work in those takedowns. Now, her strikes on the feet, they seem half-assed at times. I don't know if she's just not committing to them fully or what it is, but at times it just looks a little bit sloppy and that she isn't really putting much pep behind it. Now, Caliari, on the other hand, she has solid striking. She is technical and has that in and out style with decent hands. She has good footwork as well, but she needs to work on her head movement. She can also get taken down, but is strong enough to reverse positions, and she will also work in her own takedowns sometimes, but she isn't as skilled as Laframboise is on the mat, so I think she should avoid those wrestling exchanges throughout this matchup. I'm going to be picking Caliari here, as we already mentioned. I think she's the cleaner striker and looks stronger than Laframboise does in those clinch scenarios where Laframboise usually gets her takedowns from. I believe Caliari can fight off those takedowns and piece up Laframboise on the feet. If Caliari does end up getting taken down, though, she has proven to be able to work out of those tricky submission situations and can work back to her feet. I think Caliari gets this done on the scorecards, though. Obviously anything can happen, but I think she should just avoid the wrestling and grappling exchanges in this matchup. I think she's going to be the much better fighter on the feet and will find most of her success there. So I will be going with Nicole Caliari to start things off. We pick an underdog. Also, Laframboise is 35, as you guys can see here, and that is kind of concerning. On top of that, she hasn't fought in over 2 years, I believe. Her most recent fight is March of 2022, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Let's move on to the next fight. This is going to be an absolute banger. Otar Tanzilov taking on Josias Musasa. Now, let's start off with Tanzilov here. Although he is a well-rounded fighter, he does his best work on the feet. He's quick, he mixes in strikes, and has great combinations, and he loves to inflict damage to his opponents with kicks. He also throws out a nice 1-2, and it usually hits both levels, to the head and to the body. It doesn't matter if he starts up top, he'll end on the bottom. If he starts on the bottom, he'll end up on top. It is a slick 1-2, and because he's so quick, he lands it more often than not. He also baits his opponents into overthrowing to set up his takedowns. He'll kind of entertain those brawling exchanges to get the opponent comfortable with overthrowing, and then he'll time his takedowns beautifully after those exchanges. Now, there's a couple things that do worry me on the Tanzilov side. He is constantly moving, which sometimes causes him to gas out a little bit, and we've seen that in his previous fights. And like I mentioned, he will entertain those brawling exchanges, which can be absolutely deadly against somebody like Musasa. Now, on the Musasa side, it's tough to have an accurate depiction of his abilities because I've only been able to find highlight tapes on him. You guys know how highlight tapes work. You can make anybody look like an animal, like an absolute savage with a highlight tape. Now, from what I have seen, though, he's extremely dangerous on the feet. He's powerful. He has the ability to KO anybody, and he'll come forward and bomb away. Now, like I mentioned, I wish there was more I could find on the Musasa side, but under the circumstances, I can't go in with just hoping that Musasa, as the big underdog that has that danger factor, is just going to be able to do what he wants to Tanzilov. I have to make a prediction based on the information that I currently have, and that is that Tanzilov just has to be the pick. He is a slicker striker, and although Musasa can definitely get the KO over Tanzilov, because of that slick striking and great movement from Tanzilov, it's going to be tough for Musasa to find and land those big power shots. And on top of the fact that Tanzilov is the cleaner striker from what I've seen, he is just as lethal on the feet and has the ability to KO his opponents as well. Not to mention the fact that Tanzilov has wrestling in his back pocket, which could be good or bad against Musasa, because I don't know how good Musasa is on the ground. I don't know how his takedown defense is. And so there's a lot of unknowns, and we ended up seeing last episode how the unknowns can really mess with a prediction. But from what I know, like I said, we got to go with the information that we have in this current moment. And from what I've seen and what I was able to find out was that Tanzilov is probably going to end up getting this win. So very reluctantly, I will go with Otar Tanzilov to get things done. Both of them are undefeated too, so it's going to be interesting to see who keeps their 0 at the end of the night. Moving on, we have Yusri Belgaroui, I don't know how to pronounce his name, taking on Taiga Iwasaki. All right. Now, Yusri is one of the guys that has a replacement fight. He was supposed to take on Anverbak Danielbekov. These names are getting out of hand. But Anverbak withdrew, or Anverbik, whatever. He withdrew, so now Iwasaki is stepping in on somewhat of some short notice. Now, if you guys are familiar with the Contender Series, you will recognize Yusri. He was on the Contender Series last season, and he lost a decision to Marco Tullio, who we saw on episode 3, I believe. And it just wasn't an exciting enough fight. Tullio didn't get the contract. Yusri obviously didn't, because he got worked for 15 minutes. But one thing is, okay, let me dial back a bit. Yusri is a former Glory kickboxer. He actually fought Izzy and Pereira twice each, although he did lose all 4 of those fights. So something to keep in mind. I'm also almost certain that he's training with Alex Pereira for MMA, so that's something to keep in mind. He is measured, he's patient, methodical on the feet, and he's constantly feinting, trying to confuse his opponents. He effectively attacks with all of his limbs, and he truly does use his 6'5" frame well and fights extremely long. He also has incredible timing on the feet. He struggled with takedowns against Tullio, but since then has improved that area of his game. There's a lot to like about Yusri in this matchup especially. Now, on the Iwasaki side, he does his best work in the clinch. He's going to punish his opponents there with elbows to the head and knees to the midsection. He throws feelers out on the feet, but he'll eventually end up trying to tie up his opponents in the clinch or just trying to take him down to the mat. His kicks are pretty brutal. They're nice and snappy. He attacks the legs and torso of his opponents with them and has a beautiful push kick that he uses very effectively in his fights. Now, Yusri has to be the pick here. He's improved his takedown defense enough to the point where it's going to help him a lot against Iwasaki. Yusri also has is a massive and lengthy guy who is miles ahead on the feet in terms of technique. It's going to be extremely tough for Iwasaki to mount any sort of offense in the striking department. Yusri also seems like a pretty strong guy, so even if Iwasaki closes the distance and ties up with Yusri, I do not see him finding much success in the clinch like he usually does. I think Belgaroui picks Iwasaki apart in this fight and eventually finds a KO. That's just my take on it. There's a lot to like on the Yusri side in the striking. And like I said, he's improved his takedown defense enough where I do not think that has to be a worry here against Iwasaki. Moving on to the co-main event for episode 5 rather, is Cody Steele taking on Quemwell Ottoni. These names, man, I'm telling you. Oh my goodness. Quemwell. I've never heard that before. Kemel, whatever, man. Now, you're going to hear... The first thing you're going to hear from basically every single MMA analyst on YouTube, including myself on the Quemwell side, is that he is the only other man other than Israel Adesanya to defeat Alex Pereira in MMA. It was Alex's UFC debut all the way back in 2015, though, so it was almost a decade ago. Something to keep in mind. That stressed me out, saying that 2015 was almost a decade ago. Let's get into breaking down this fight now. Cody Steele. He has a grappling background, but he is truly a complete fighter. He wants to wrestle his opponents, but he hardly ever forces it because he's able to find success in the striking. He also has a solid get-up game and a fantastic ability to create scrambles when he's taken down. He constantly moves forward and pressures his opponents, and he has the cardio to back that pressure up. He also has true power in his hands. I was able to find all 6 of his fights because I think all of them are under the Fury FC banner. And his last 3 fights, 2 of his opponents that he KO'd were just out flat cold, like sleeping on the canvas, just put them away. Although he can be hittable and taken down at times, because I've seen the progression throughout his 6 professional fights, he has truly worked hard to fix those faults in his game, and he's also a dog. He never quits. All right. In one of his fights against a man called Nico Echeverry. It was 2 fights ago. It was so weird to watch because that's the fight where you really saw the holes in Cody's game, where he was hittable and able to get taken down. But like I mentioned, he has worked really hard to fix those faults in his game. But like just over halfway through the second round, Cody Steele, like something switched in his brain, it looked like, where he just said, you know what, I've decided that I no longer want to continue this fight, and I'm just going to put away my opponent and end it. And he literally just started bombing away at Echeverry up against the cage, and then eventually grabbed his head, kneed him beautifully, and put him out cold. It was really crazy to watch, I'm not going to lie, where he just decided, I'm putting him away. I'm KOing my opponent, and we're out of here. And that's exactly what he did. It was insane to watch. It was, honestly. Now, on the Quemwell Ottoni side, like we already mentioned, the only other guy to beat Alex Pereira in MMA, but it was back in 2015. Now, he's a great technical striker with nice combinations, and he has that wide, bouncy stance, which allows him to effectively implement that in-and-out striking style. He does keep his hands low, though, which is a concern, especially against a heavy hitter like Steele, and he will entertain brawls, which also is nerve-wracking going up against somebody that has the power of Cody Steele. Now, most of his tape that is available for watching is from 2019 and before, so I obviously take those into consideration, but they can't hold that much weight because MMA is very much of what have you done for me lately, kind of. I was able to find his most recent fight, which was over 2 years ago. So there's some things you have to keep in mind for the Ottoni side. Now, I wouldn't mind picking him. Honestly, there's a lot to like about him, but there's a couple of things keeping me away from the Ottoni side. His inactivity, for one. Like I said, his most recent fight was over 2 years ago. And the fact that this is apparently at lightweight. All right? And yes, you're hearing that correctly, that he did fight Alex Pereira in his career before, which was at 185. And although his most recent fight over 2 years ago was at welterweight, I don't think Ottoni has ever fought down at 155. So on top of the fact that Cody Steele has a cardio advantage in this matchup, going all the way down to 155 is only going to help Steele in that regard. So it's going to be interesting to see how Ottoni deals with that weight cut, how he looks during the weigh-ins as well on Monday. But I just think Steele outdogs him here and overwhelms him with his pressure. Ottoni may find some success early on while Cody is trying to find his range because he is quite the smaller man in this fight in terms of height. And I'm assuming reach, I can't really find the reach for either of them. But I think as Cody finds his timing, as he finds the range to land on Ottoni, and as the fight goes on, I think Ottoni slows down and Cody Steele honestly takes over and eventually finds a ground and pound finish. That's how I'm going to be calling it. I think Cody does find the finish against Ottoni here. Let's move on to the main event of the evening. Navajo Stirling taking on Philip Latu. Now, this is another fighter that, when I was talking about the Rafael Cerqueira guy, the third opponent that Cerqueira got before Cerqueira got signed to the UFC was a man called Francesco Mazzeo. So the opponent that they found for Francesco was Philip Latu. But Mazzeo had visa issues, so Philip Latu, the short notice fighter, now needed a short notice replacement to keep his fight going. And that ended up being Navajo Stirling. Now, Stirling is a city kickboxing product. The camp where Adesanya, Hooker, Kai Kara France, Kevin Jousset. I know there's somebody else I'm pretty sure I'm missing, but that's the camp that he trains in. He has a Muay Thai and kickboxing background. On the feet, he is technical, methodical, and there are no wasted movements whatsoever when it comes to Stirling in the striking department. He's also a cerebral fighter, and he's very aware during his fights. He has a vlog series on his YouTube channel where he talks about his fights and after they happen and what he was thinking about in certain moments during them. He has a great ability to identify things and make adjustments mid-fight. I encourage you guys to watch that vlog series that he has because it really gets you in the mind of Stirling and how high of an IQ he has, especially in the striking. Now, on the Latu side, actually, there's one more thing I want to mention on the Stirling side is I've seen him get takedowns, and even though that's not his plan A for the most part, he will feint his takedowns throughout the fights just to keep his opponents guessing. It opens up their defenses a little bit more so he can implement his awesome striking. Now, on the Latu side, he's quick and explosive on the feet. He throws at 100% basically every time he goes in for an attack. He can get a little bit wild at times, but once he hurts his opponent, he's like a shark that smells blood. He will not stop until he gets them out of there. He does some weird side shuffle thing that I've noticed on the feet, which honestly I think is going to get him in trouble against somebody, a technician like Stirling. So it's going to be interesting to see if he ends up doing that weird shuffle. But anyway, in his only loss, I saw him get absolutely mauled against the cage and on the mat. And honestly, I can see that happening against Stirling as well, because even though Stirling's strength is in the striking, I can see him putting in some good work up against the cage where Latu has struggled before. Now, honestly, I think Stirling is going to have his way against Latu on the feet, and that's where I think this fight takes place primarily. Latu can outdog some people, and if he makes this a dirty and scrappy fight, he could honestly get a win over somebody like Stirling that needs to kind of have more of a methodical performance and more, I don't want to say point fighting because Stirling is extremely dangerous and has the ability to put his opponents away, but that kind of a style Latu can find success over. But honestly, I don't see that happening. I think Stirling will use his range well to stay safe from the wildness of Latu, and he should be able to mix in his strikes well to open up Latu's defenses and pick him apart. I don't know if Stirling will find the finish because Latu is kind of that doggish kind of fighter that won't get put out easily, but Stirling definitely has the power and ability to do it. The more I sit on these picks, the more confident I get. Except for the Tanzilov pick, like we mentioned. We saw last week on episode 4 how some of the fighters who don't have much tape available came in and destroyed their opponents, and Musasa can honestly join that club against somebody like Tanzilov because we just don't know. We just don't know. But we have to base our picks off of what we know, guys. That's what we got to do. So, starting off the card, we pick an underdog, and this is the only underdog we're actually going with. Nicole Caliari, Otar Tanzilov, Yusri Belgaroui, Cody Steele, and Navajo Stirling. Those are going to be the picks for episode 5, guys. Make sure you hit that like button. drop a subscription to the channel if you are new, and comment down below what you think of episode 5 and your picks for each of the 5 fights. I'm going to be having a fight companion this week for the fight card, so make sure you guys join me on YouTube. I'll be commentating on the fights. We can shoot the shit about episode 5, and hopefully we end up going with another sweep 5-0 like we did for episode 3. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.